What would you do if, on your wedding night, the night you and your wife are supposed to consummate your marriage, but you find her consummating with your father instead? In the heart of a land where the earth was as rich as the history that flowed through it, there lay the kingdom of Zwanzi. Nestled between towering hills and expansive plains, this kingdom was more than just a place. It was a living testament to the vibrant culture and traditions that had been passed down through countless generations. The people of Zwanzi lived in harmony with the land, their lives interwoven with the rhythms of nature. The air was always thick, with the sense of roasting meats, fresh fruits, and the soft perfume of flowering acacia trees. Drums echoed through the village square, carrying the pulse of the kingdom's heart. The elders, with their white hair and weathered faces, spoke with wisdom, while the youth danced and celebrated beneath the wide, open skies. In this kingdom, among the high towers of the elders' compound and the bustling markets, lived a young man named Kazi. He was the son of the revered elder Temba, a man whose wisdom was so vast that even the king of the neighboring kingdom came to him for advice. Kazi, with his broad shoulders and steady hands, had inherited his father's strength and sense of honor. But where his father was calm and measured, Kazi was filled with fire, an unquenchable passion for life, for love, for everything the world had to offer. His heart, unguarded and pure, was a treasure in itself, though many could never understand how deeply it ran. And there was Zuri. Ah, Zuri! To speak her name was to speak of beauty that surpassed the splendor of the sun itself. Her skin was the color of polished ebony, her hair a cascade of midnight waves that caught the light and shimmered like 1,000 stars. Her eyes, those eyes, dark as the night sky, glistened with secrets that no one could quite grasp. Wherever she went, men stopped in their tracks, mesmerized by her grace, by the way she moved, as though the earth itself had been made for her to walk upon. Zuri was the kind of woman whose presence could silence a crowd, whose smile could melt the hardest of hearts. She was everything Kazi had ever dreamed of, and more. From the first moment he saw her, standing in the center of the village square, her laughter like music in the air, he knew she was the one. Kazi had been raised to value loyalty, to hold it above all things. His father had instilled in him a deep respect for the bonds of love and family, teaching him that there could be no greater strength than that which was rooted in trust. And Kazi believed it, wholeheartedly. Zuri's beauty, her laughter, her warmth, it was more than he could have ever hoped for. He gave her his heart, fully and without reservation. He spent fortunes on gifts that he thought might make her happy. He would return from his long journeys, bringing with him jewels, fine silks, and the rarest spices, all to see that smile upon her face. His love was as grand as the kingdom itself, endless and unyielding. And in return, Zuri seemed to offer him everything he wanted. She spoke with him in the quiet hours of the evening, under the great tree that stood at the center of the kingdom, telling him tales of distant lands and secret dreams. She listened to his hopes, and in her gentle touch, Kazi believed he had found the one who would walk beside him through all the days of his life. But Zuri was not a woman to be bound by the ideals of any man, not even Kazi. For while Kazi had given her all of himself, she had withheld parts of her soul, parts of her that craved something different, something forbidden. And it was in the quiet hours, when Kazi was away fulfilling his duties, that Zuri began to seek what she could not find in his love. She was as much drawn to the power of his father, the elder Temba, as she was to Kazi himself. Temba, aged and wise, held a kind of magnetic force that few could resist. His eyes, though clouded by time, still gleamed with sharpness, his voice still rich with authority. And though he was Kazi's father, an elder of great stature in the kingdom, he was not impervious to the allure of youth. Zuri, in her heart, was a woman who hungered for something more than love. She sought power, she sought the forbidden, and she sought the thrill that came with risking everything. What was the value of purity when the temptation of strength and authority lay just within reach? And so while Kazi, in his innocence, dreamed of a future with her, Zuri's heart was already wandering down a darker path, a path that would eventually bring her into the arms of the very man Kazi trusted the most. Kazi, the man who believed that nothing, no betrayal, no shadow could ever touch the love he shared with Zuri. In the days that followed, the love between Kazi and Zuri only grew stronger, and the kingdom of Zwanzi seemed to shimmer under the weight of their devotion. Kazi, with his boundless heart and unwavering faith, lavished his love upon Zuri in every way he could imagine. It wasn't just the gifts, though they were many. He brought her the finest silk from the distant merchants who traveled the great desert, the brightest jewels from the hills beyond the rivers, the richest perfumes that carried the scent of far-off lands. He wanted her to feel as if she were the center of the world, as if all that was good in the land had been crafted just for her. He spent his days carving a future for them, a future he believed would be perfect, one built on the foundation of trust, loyalty, and unspoken promises. His love for her was a fire that burned brighter with every passing day, and he never once hesitated to show her just how much she meant to him. He would bring her flowers in the morning, plucked from the edges of the Great Plains, their colors as vibrant as her smile. He would spend hours talking to her under the stars, listening to her voice, which was like a soft song that eased his weary soul. He was certain that Zuri was the one who would walk beside him through the highs and lows of life. Every moment with her felt like a blessing. Zuri, in turn, seemed to respond to his affection with equal fervor. Her beauty, which was already legendary in the kingdom, seemed to grow even more radiant in the glow of Kazi's adoration. She laughed at his jokes, no matter how silly they were, and always smiled when he brought her gifts, her eyes sparkling with appreciation. To Kazi, it seemed as though she was the embodiment of all the things he had ever dreamed of. Grace, beauty, warmth. She was the sun around which his world spun, and he could not imagine a life without her. She held his hand in public, walking with him through the bustling markets, her presence like a living, breathing treasure. The people of the kingdom looked on in awe, admiring the way they moved as one, a couple destined for greatness, their love a beacon to all who saw it. But even as the kingdom celebrated their love, the figure of Kazi's father, Elder Temba, loomed in the background. Temba was a man of great wisdom, his years marked by the trials and triumphs of a life well lived. His eyes, though dimmed by age, still sparkled with knowledge and authority. His voice carried the weight of experience, and when he spoke, even the youngest of the village listened. He was a man to be respected for his wisdom, for his generosity, and for the way he had raised Kazi. Temba, proud of his son's choices, watched from the shadows of his home as Kazi's love for Zuri blossomed. He had raised Kazi to be a man of honor, to value loyalty and trust above all else, and he was pleased to see that his son had found such a beautiful, charming woman to share his life with. He would often sit with Kazi, offering advice about the responsibilities of leadership, the weight of the future they both hoped for, and the importance of love as the foundation of all things. "You've made a wise choice, my son," Elder Temba would say as he gazed fondly at the couple. "A man who chooses wisely in love has already begun to build his kingdom. Zuri will be a great partner for you, I have no doubt." But while Kazi's future seemed clear, Elder Temba's own heart held a more complicated story. Beneath the surface of his proud smiles and wise words, there lingered a quiet longing, a desire for something that his age could not fulfill. He looked at Zuri with a kind of reverence, his eyes tracing the curves of her youth, the softness of her skin, the way she moved with such fluid grace. He could see the beauty in her that was untainted by time, the beauty that he himself could never reclaim. Though he never spoke of it, his glances toward her lingered longer than they should have, and while he never crossed any boundaries, he remained respectful, as a father would to his son's love. there was a hunger in his heart, one that he could not easily ignore, a hunger for the youth, for the life that seemed to pulse so vibrantly in her. But beneath it all, as the festivals continued and the music swirled around them, a dark undercurrent began to pulse, quietly, almost imperceptibly, through the fabric of their love. Zuri's eyes, so full of charm and affection when she gazed at Kazi, would occasionally flicker with something else when she was alone with Elder Temba. Her laughter would take on a different tone, softer, more intimate, and when she thought no one was looking, she would glance at the elder with a look that no one could quite place. As the days stretched into weeks and the seasons shifted in the kingdom of Zwanzi, Kazi remained consumed by his love for Zuri and the duties he had inherited as the son of Elder Temba. The young man was tireless, his devotion to his people and his future kingdom keeping him away from Zuri for long stretches at a time. The kingdom, after all, required him, and with every festival, every council, every task of leadership, he rose to meet it, always with the hope that when the day's work was done, Zuri's bright smile would greet him at the end of it. But as his shadow grew longer, so too did the darkening of the space between them. Unseen by his eyes, the threads of betrayal began to twist in the quiet spaces where his heart could not reach. In those moments, when Kazi was busy with his duties, the kingdom bustled around him. Zuri and the elder began to meet in secret, their meetings cloaked in the shadows of the night. They were not meetings of malice at first. No, not at all. They began as mere moments of shared solitude, moments when they could speak freely without the prying eyes of the kingdom, without the expectations of their roles. Zuri would visit the elder's home under the guise of delivering food or herbs, always finding an excuse to linger a little longer, to sit by his side as the evening light faded into darkness. Elder Temba, wise in his years and knowing the value of quiet, began to welcome her presence. It was a presence that stirred something within him, a stir that he had not felt in many years. At first it was mere admiration on both sides, admiration for each other's intellect, admiration for the wisdom that Elder Temba had gathered over the course of his long life. Zuri, in her youth, had never met anyone like him. She had heard the stories of his accomplishments and his cunning as a leader, the way he had guided the kingdom through times of both famine and abundance. To Zuri, he was more than just Kazi's father. He was a living legend, a man whose very presence commanded respect. He had the kind of power that Kazi, in his youthful enthusiasm, had not yet begun to understand. It was a power that was tempered by age, a wisdom that could not be matched by mere beauty or innocence. And for the first time, Zuri began to crave something beyond the sweet love Kazi offered. It wasn't intentional at first, this drawing together in the secrecy of the night. It started with an innocent touch, a hand placed on a shoulder in comfort, and then, before they knew it, their quiet conversations shifted from the subjects of the kingdom to something more intimate. Zuri began to linger in his presence, and Elder Temba's gaze grew deeper, more knowing. Their conversations, once filled with harmless pleasantries, now began to carry an unspoken tension, a tension neither could ignore. Zuri found herself drawn to the elder's wisdom, his knowledge of life's deeper mysteries, his understanding of what it meant to truly live beyond the confines of the body. She was intoxicated by it. And then one night, when the moon hung heavy in the sky and the winds carried the scent of jasmine through the windows, their mutual longing could no longer be denied. Zuri, dressed in the silk of a midnight gown, entered the elder's chambers as she had done many times before, but this time there was no excuse for her presence. There were no herbs to be delivered, no stories to be shared. There was only a shared silence between them, an electric charge in the air that could not be ignored. Zuri. The elder's voice was low, almost a whisper, yet it carried the weight of 1,000 untold stories. His eyes, heavy with age but burning with desire, locked onto hers, and for a moment, neither spoke. There was a sense of inevitability between them now, a shared understanding of what had been quietly building beneath the surface. Zuri's heart raced, though she had not meant for it to be this way. I shouldn't be here, she whispered, her breath catching in her throat. She looked at him, trying to read the depths of his intentions. But the elder's hand reached out, brushing against hers in a gesture that was both tender and commanding. "You are here because you want to be," he said softly, as though stating a fact. His voice carried a knowing that unsettled her, yet at the same time it awakened something deep within. Something she could not control. Zuri, with her heart pounding, found herself unable to step back. The pull of his presence was magnetic, far stronger than anything she had ever felt before. Kazi, for all his love and devotion, could not offer her this depth, this wisdom, this knowledge of herself that she now realized she craved. The elder knew things about the world that Kazi had not yet learned, and in that knowledge, Zuri found herself lost. Their hands touched again, this time with more intention. Zuri's breath quickened, and the elder's eyes darkened with a hunger he had not known he possessed. The line between admiration and desire blurred in that moment, and with a quiet but powerful force, the two of them gave in to something neither could resist. The kingdom of Zwanzi, which had once been a place of innocence and hope, now felt far away, as though they were in a different world altogether, one where the consequences of their actions were far from their thoughts. And so it began, an affair, built not on malice but on the intoxicating blend of forbidden attraction and unspoken desires. Zuri's love for Kazi was still there, still a part of her, but something had shifted inside of her. The elder, though once a figure of paternal care, had now become a forbidden temptation, a man whose power and experience ignited a fire within her that Kazi, for all his purity, could never match. The affair continued in secret, hidden away from the eyes of the kingdom, but as their meetings grew more frequent, so too did the subtle changes in Zuri's behavior. She became distant with Kazi, her smiles less bright, her eyes not meeting his when he would speak to her. She would grow restless, her thoughts seemingly far away, as though part of her was always somewhere else, with someone else. Kazi, though blinded by love, began to notice the small changes. The way Zuri's laughter no longer reached her eyes, the way she seemed distracted when he spoke, the way she would sometimes look at him with a blank expression, as if she were no longer fully present. But in his heart, he dismissed these signs, telling himself that it was nothing, that his love for her was enough to fix anything. He refused to believe that she could betray him, that she could turn away from him. After all, how could anyone betray the purest of loves? But what Kazi could not understand was that sometimes, what the heart wants is not always what it should have. Sometimes, the very thing we crave can lead us to our own undoing. The danger of forbidden desire was now settling deep within their hearts, and the path they were on could not be unmade. Zuri, torn between her love for Kazi and the insatiable hunger she felt for the elder, had reached a point where the lines between right and wrong blurred beyond recognition. She knew what she was doing was wrong, but there was a part of her that could not stop. The elder's touch, his wisdom, the power he commanded. It was all too much to resist. And in those stolen moments, the world outside seemed to disappear. Kazi, still in the depths of his devotion, had no idea what was coming. The sun had barely begun its descent into the horizon, casting a golden hue over the kingdom of Zwanzi as the long-awaited wedding day finally arrived. The air hummed with anticipation, the kingdom alive with color and movement. The people gathered in the great square, the sound of drums pounding like the heartbeat of the land, the rhythmic swaying of dancers filling the streets, and the scent of freshly roasted meats and sweet pastries lingering in the warm evening air. It was a celebration like no other. Zuri, the radiant bride, and Kazi, the beloved son of Elder Temba, were finally to be joined in sacred union. Kazi stood at the front of the assembly, his heart swelling with joy as he looked at Zuri. She walked toward him, resplendent in a gown woven from the finest silks of the kingdom, her smile so perfect it made the earth beneath him feel soft. She was the embodiment of all his dreams, the woman he had given everything to, the woman whose love had sustained him through every challenge he faced. As she approached, the cheers of the crowd rose in a deafening chorus, but Kazi heard nothing except the sound of his own heartbeat. He had made it. Today was the day his love for Zuri would be sealed forever, beneath the sacred tree of the kingdom, where generations of marriages had begun, and where, he believed, his own journey of happiness would unfold. The sacred tree, its massive roots winding deep into the earth, stood tall and proud, its branches stretching wide to embrace the heavens above. It was here that Kazi and Zuri would exchange their vows, their promises to love one another until the end of their days. The ceremony unfolded with grandeur, the chants of the elders, the blessing of the ancestors, the laughter and joy of the people. But beneath the surface of all this joy, there was an unsettling stillness in Zuri's eyes. She smiled, yes, but her gaze was distant, her thoughts seemingly far away, as if the weight of something she had been carrying inside her was beginning to crush her. Kazi, lost in the beauty of the moment, saw none of this. He could not see the truth of what had already transpired between Zuri and his father. He could not hear the whispers of fate that circled around them like a dark cloud, waiting for its moment to strike. The ceremony reached its peak. The vows exchanged, and with a kiss, Kazi and Zuri were bound to one another in the eyes of the kingdom. But as the celebration began to die down, and the sounds of festivity gave way to the quiet anticipation of the night, Zuri's mind was no longer with Kazi. She stood by his side, her body in one place but her thoughts in another. She could feel the elder's presence, his eyes upon her even though he was far away in the distance. She knew the night was coming. The night when the truth would finally be revealed. It would be the night when Kazi would see just how far she had gone, how far she had strayed from the love he had given her. The time came for Kazi and Zuri to retire to their bridal chamber. The air was thick with excitement, with all eyes on them as they left the hall, the sounds of the kingdom's celebration still echoing in the distance. But as they passed through the grand hall, Zuri's steps slowed, her heart heavy with the weight of the decision she had made. She had promised herself that tonight would be a night of finality. No more secrets, no more lies. She could not stay in the arms of Kazi, knowing what she had already shared with his father. She could not pretend that the man she had married was the one she truly desired. Kazi, unaware, made his way to her, his heart fluttering in anticipation, imagining all the dreams he and Zuri would now fulfill together. He opened the door to their bridal chamber, the heavy wood creaking as it swung inward. As he stepped into the dimly lit room, his eyes were on the bed, on the promise of the night ahead. But the sight that greeted him was not what he expected. His heart stopped. His legs turned to lead, and for a moment, he thought he must have stumbled into the wrong room. He turned to look, and there, before him, in the most intimate and devastating of embraces, was Zuri. She was not alone. The elder, his father, was there in the bed with her, his arms wrapped around her in a way Kazi had never seen, his face twisted in satisfaction. And there was Zuri, her eyes closed in pleasure, as if the sight of Kazi's entrance did not even faze her. Even a blind man could see that they had just finished a steamy round of what Kazi and her were supposed to do. The room smelt of it. Time seemed to freeze. Kazi stood there, a silent witness to the collapse of everything he had known, everything he had believed in. His mind could not process it, could not accept what his eyes were seeing. His father, his bride, in the very chamber he had hoped to share with her. On the night that was supposed to unite them forever, the betrayal was laid bare. Zuri's eyes opened slowly, but they did not meet Kazi's. Instead, she turned her head slightly, her expression cold, her lips curling into a small, almost mocking smile. She pushed herself up from the elder's arms, sitting up in the bed, and looked at Kazi with an air of indifference. You never truly understood me, Kazi, she said, her voice low but sharp. Your love was too pure, too innocent. I needed something else. Zuri's eyes were on the girl with surprise, something you could never give me. Kazi's world spun around him, his breath catching in his throat. His heart, once so full of love, was now a shattered thing, jagged and raw. He took a step forward, but the words stuck in his throat. Why? Was all he managed to whisper, his voice trembling. Zuri didn't answer immediately. She looked at him with a mixture of pity and disdain, as if he were the one who had failed her, as if it was his fault that she had strayed. Because, she finally said, your father understood me in ways you never did. He knew what I needed. He knew the things I craved, things you could never offer. Your love was too young, too naive. He gave me the wisdom I sought. He gave me the power I needed. Kazi's eyes shifted to his father, standing now. His posture no longer that of the wise elder Kazi had admired, but that of a man who had taken everything Kazi had held dear. The elder's eyes met his, and for a moment there was no remorse, no apology. There was only coldness. You are a fool, Kazi, Elder Temba said, his voice laced with bitterness. I gave you everything, and still, you could not see. She was never yours to claim. His words stung with the weight of a betrayal that cut deeper than Kazi could ever imagined. The man who had raised him, the man he had trusted with his life, had not only stolen his trust, but had stolen the woman he loved. His father, the elder, had shattered Kazi's soul in one cruel stroke. Kazi stood there frozen, torn between rage and heartbreak. His love for Zuri had been so pure, so unyielding, but now it seemed it had been nothing more than a mirage, an illusion created by his own misguided beliefs. The very woman he had sworn to protect had been the architect of his undoing, and the man who had been his mentor, his father, had chosen to destroy him, to take everything he held dear. Without a word, Kazi turned and walked out of the chamber, his heart heavy with the knowledge that everything he had believed in had been shattered in an instant. The door slammed shut behind him, and the sound echoed in the empty halls, a final exclamation mark to the destruction of his world. Kazi stumbled out of the bridal chamber, his chest tight with the weight of betrayal. His heart, once a fortress built on love and trust, now felt like a fragile thing, shattered, scattered across the cold stone floor of his father's house. The air outside seemed too fresh, too pure, in contrast to the suffocating darkness that had overtaken him. His mind was clouded, his thoughts a storm of anger, confusion, and sorrow. How had it all gone so wrong? How had the woman he adored, the woman he had trusted with everything, betrayed him in such a callous way? He wandered aimlessly through the corridors of the grand palace, his eyes vacant, his steps mechanical. Every corner seemed to mock him, every statue, every tapestry, a reminder of the life he had once dreamed of. One filled with Zuri by his side, a life that had been stolen from him in the most brutal of ways. The kingdom was still alive with celebration, the music and laughter continuing in the distance, oblivious to the carnage in his heart. His mind raced as he tried to piece together what had happened. Zuri, the woman who had once been his reason for breathing, had given herself to his father, his own flesh and blood. The elder, the man he had looked up to, the one who had raised him, had betrayed him in the most intimate of ways. How could they both have done this? How could they have desecrated everything Kazi had worked for, everything he had sacrificed to build a life with her? In the distance, he could hear the sounds of the celebrations, the drums, the chanting, the joyous cries of the people. But none of that mattered to Kazi now. The kingdom, his heritage, all of it felt like a foreign land to him, a place he no longer belonged. He could no longer see the vibrant beauty of Zwanzi, the land that had once been his pride. Now, all he saw was the shattered reflection of his own soul. Zuri's indifference had cut deeper than anything he could have imagined. Her cold words had been like ice, as if his love had never meant anything to her. She had not begged for forgiveness. She had not shown even the smallest sign of regret. Instead, she had dismissed him as if he were nothing more than an obstacle, a naive fool who had never understood her. Her betrayal was not only of his love, but of everything he had believed in: honor, loyalty, and respect. The elder, too, had given him nothing. His words were harsh, almost mocking. "You are a fool, Kazi. I gave you everything, and still you could not see." The elder had taken everything from him, even the respect Kazi had once held for him. What was left now? A kingdom of broken promises, a home filled with lies, and a future that had evaporated before his very eyes. Kazi's fists clenched at his sides, the anger rising in him like a flame, but it was quickly smothered by the overwhelming sadness that had taken its place. His heart, torn between love and hate, between the man he had been and the man he was becoming, felt like it was breaking all over again. He wanted to scream, to lash out, to do something, anything, to numb the pain. But there was no release, no escape from the hollow emptiness inside him. As the hours passed, the weight of his sorrow settled heavily upon him. He could not stay here, in this place that had once felt like home, the kingdom, his family, the life he had envisioned. All of it was tainted now, poisoned by betrayal. How could he ever return to the life he had known, knowing what had happened? How could he ever look at Zuri again, or at his father, the two people he had loved most in this world, without seeing the scars of their treachery etched into their faces? His decision was agonizing, but it was inevitable. He could no longer remain in Zwanzi. He could not bear the thought of living in the shadow of this betrayal. He had to leave, to disappear into the wilderness, to escape the suffocating weight of his grief and anger. Perhaps somewhere out there, in the depths of the land, he could find a way to heal, or at least forget. Perhaps the vast wilderness could offer him solace, something Zuri and his father never could. He would leave and never return. Without a word, Kazi made his way toward the gates of the kingdom. The guards, too lost in their revelry, paid him no mind as he passed. The moon hung high above, casting its pale light on the path ahead, and the wind whispered through the trees, as if it, too, could sense the sorrow that clung to him. His heart was heavy, each step a testament to the finality of his decision. He did not look back. He did not need to. The kingdom he had once known, the life he had built, were already behind him, fading like a distant memory. He had nothing left here. No family, no love, no purpose. As he walked away, the first rays of dawn began to stretch across the sky, casting a soft glow over the land. It was a new day, but for Kazi, it was a day of darkness. The world seemed to have grown smaller, colder, and more unforgiving. The promise of tomorrow felt empty, its future uncertain. But he had made his choice, and there was no turning back now. Word spread quickly, the tale of betrayal traveling through the kingdom like wildfire. The people, who had once celebrated Kazi's union with Zuri, now mourned the loss of their golden boy. Some pitied him, others blamed him, but all of them knew that the heart of Zwanzi had been broken that night. As for Zuri and the elder, their union, though initially triumphant, was now nothing more than a hollow shell. The passion they had shared was tainted by the shadows of their betrayal. There was no true love between them, only a brief, dangerous flame that had burned too brightly, too recklessly. And now they were left with the bitter consequences of their actions. The kingdom would never be the same. The legacy of Kazi, the man who had been loved and betrayed, would echo throughout the land for generations. His name would be spoken with reverence, a cautionary tale of love, lust, and the price of betrayal. And as for Kazi himself, his future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. The man who had once been the pride of Zwanzi had been broken, and only time would tell whether he could ever heal from the wounds that had been inflicted upon him. His mind, once sharp and filled with purpose, had become a blur of confusion and regret. How could the woman he loved so deeply, the woman who had promised to stand by his side, betray him in such a way? And how could his own father, the man who had raised him, taught him right from wrong, have committed the ultimate betrayal? Back in Zwanzi, the kingdom had shifted. The once celebrated union of Zuri and the elder, a symbol of passion and power, had crumbled into something far less glorious. Zuri, once the radiant jewel of the kingdom, now walked through the palace halls with a quiet sadness. Her beauty, which had captivated Kazi's heart and the hearts of many others, seemed faded, tarnished by the stain of her actions. She had gotten what she thought she wanted: passion, excitement, and the allure of a forbidden love. But what she hadn't counted on was the emptiness that followed. The elder, with all his wisdom, had never been able to fill the void inside her. Their love, once so fiery and intense, had turned to ashes. The once lustful nights they had shared now felt hollow, as if the very essence of their relationship had been poisoned by guilt. The elder's touch no longer stirred her as it once had, and the thrilling danger of their affair had faded into a quiet, aching remorse. Zuri often found herself staring into the distance, her thoughts a tangled mess of regret. She had once thought Kazi's love was too innocent, too pure. But now, she realized that it was the very purity of that love that had made it so special. And in her reckless pursuit of forbidden desire, she had lost not only Kazi's love, but also a part of herself. The elder, too, had changed. The fire that once burned in his eyes had dimmed, replaced by the dull glow of regret. He had spent years accumulating wealth and power, but he had never truly understood the cost of his actions. Now, in his old age, he found himself alone with his thoughts, questioning everything he had done. His once proud position as the elder, a man of respect and influence, felt meaningless. The power, passion, these things could be taken from him at any moment. But love, true love, was something he could never regain. He had destroyed the one person who had loved him without reservation, his own son. The story of Kazi, Zuri, and the elder had ended, but its echoes would last forever. It was a tale that would be remembered not for its tragic end, but for the lessons it imparted. The danger of unchecked desire, the fragility of trust, and the enduring power of love. As we reach the end of Kazi's journey, we want to hear from you. What would you have done if you were in Kazi's shoes? Could you find the strength to forgive the ones who shattered your trust, or would you walk away and never look back? Is love truly enough to heal such deep wounds, or is forgiveness something that must come from within, no matter the pain? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Let's start a conversation about love, betrayal, and the power of forgiveness. We'd love to hear your perspective, and who knows, your story might just help someone else heal. And if you enjoyed this tale, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another captivating African story like this. Until next time, remember that every tale carries a lesson, and the journey of the heart is never as simple as it seems.